Hello! If you've made it this far into the audiobook, thank you so much. Like, really, you listening means a lot to me. Every like and comment as I've worked on this audiobook, releasing about 120 hours of audio so far for the last few years has meant more to me than you likely realize. Going into the new year here, I am aiming to finish the audiobook up without falling off schedule again. And if you're enjoying the audiobook and want to help keep me motivated, I've opened a Patreon. I've spent hundreds of dollars on this project, on art and equipment, just to make the audiobook happen. And while I don't expect to ever break even on that, I've just done this out of passion. I started doing this audiobook for two reasons. One is just simply to work on my voice acting skills, which I feel like have come a long way. And two was, this is a long book and I don't read very fast. So without an audiobook, I knew I would never read it again. So I decided, well, I'll make the audiobook. So here we are. By joining, you would be helping me stay motivated, and you'll get a bunch of perks, like having access to the next 2 chapters ahead of time, high-quality downloads of every chapter's art, and the audio, and access to anything else I put up there. Chapter 86, next week's chapter, is already up there, so if you want to listen to it early for free, just head on over. I'm also working on getting the audiobook onto Spotify and some other audio platforms. What's frustrating there is that it's weirdly expensive to just give out the audiobook for free. But I am trying to figure that out, so hopefully I'll have that on there in the next week or two. Anyway, thanks for listening to my little tangent here, and I hope you enjoy the final arc of our Prey and Lamb journey. Chapter 85, And When We Come Home. Start of Arc 7. It is remarkable how swiftly things can return to normal. Only a short while ago, chaos reigned, and as everything had been so completely beyond any pony's control and the royal sisters were silent, many had despaired in that moment. But hope had dawned like the glorious sun on a new day. A whirling corona of rainbow light had driven back the insanity, restoring everything to its correct and proper place. Harmony had once again prevailed. As ponies abruptly found themselves restored to their proper frame of mind, or sitting in the middle of a street which had just been floating, first came shock at the suddenness, then fear that discord would strike again any second, and then third and finally, joy. Celebration! Upper and Lower Canterlot. For once there was next to no distinction between the classes as all rejoiced and gave thanks. Tears were shed as frantic ponies found their loved ones alive and well. The destruction, the warping, all of it was undone. There wasn't any need for even one of the many statues of Celestia to be repaired. Every single thing, large or small, had been restored to its proper and perfect place. On the first day, most of Pony colonized Equestria partied long into the night. On the second day, a good feeling of hope and renewal still pervaded everywhere. A second, unofficial holiday was announced by all non-essential businesses. Meanwhile, messages flew frantically back and forth, not just across the whole of the country, but across all borders too. Assurances, explanations, and more assurances, promises, schedules for urgent meetings, yet more assurances, and a push to immediately restart all halted trade. Here, though, even if it didn't become common knowledge until a fair while later, a lingering black stain was caused. Griffonia didn't accept Equestria's reassurance, and essentially blocked all incoming equestrian trade by raising tariffs so harshly that no pony trader was willing to take the loss. Not only that, but without further warning, the Griffins clamped down on their side of the border, evicting all visiting non-citizen ponies from their lands over the course of the next few days. But that wasn't a problem to most equestrians, not having anything to do with Griffins or the cold, mountainous land up north. It was a case of, how dare these spiteful Griffin heathens, mixed with the attitude of, oh well, their loss. It really was utterly remarkable how quickly normal life resumes after a disaster ends. Almost too remarkable. The entirety of Canterlot had been overrun by one mad creature. The land and sky warped with impossible, uncounterable magic. Life in all sense turned on its head. Even the 2 Alicorn sisters apparently unable to answer. And yet now, ponies were going about their lives once again. Trotting down the streets, working the weather, coming and going, and otherwise back to earning a living. And while many a pony was still upset about discord and the newspapers were still going wild, there was no massive uproar, no riots, no panicking citizens loading up their valuables and fleeing the city. Nothing of the sort. Why was this? Because there was no lingering signs or evidence of any damage? Because everything had been reset? Because it was the pony-beloved power of harmony which had saved them all? Why? Unexpected and unforeseen pony resilience? Patriotic union in the face of adversity? Pride? Even just complacency? Or perhaps rather, because there seemed to have been a subtle, unnoticed calming effect left over by the magic of harmony. Everyone was calmer, far calmer than the situation called for. More upbeat, more positive, more cheerful. It was like Discord's return had occurred a few months ago, and not just a few days. And then there were those who had been warped by Discord himself. The crazies. Thankfully restored now, of course, but still. How could they just shrug it off? Ponies who had never suffered tragedy or seen disaster, who were naturally skittish and distrusting of the unknown, and who should have by all rights been left with PTSD. But they weren't. Most weren't even left overly nervous and distrusting after the incident. When interviewed, nearly without exception, these ponies reported that their memory of the event, both before and while under the crazed effects of Discord's influence, were blurred hazes. In the few cases where an individual could correctly be linked to the actions as one of the crazies, bearing in mind that all evidence was now gone and the land restored, these recovered individuals could barely even remember the perverse acts they had performed while under the Serpentine Chimera's chaotic influence. And, as a result, these ponies weren't left feeling particularly guilty, despite there being strong evidence that the warped actions an afflicted individual undertook while crazed were strongly linked to their original personality, either as a complete reversal or as a removal of all inhibitions. Again, to those few who took note of the lack of worry caused, was itself worrying. Actually, somewhat ironically, it was mostly the ponies who had escaped Discord's touch, and who had instead had to either hide or run around trying to survive inside the unleashed world of chaos, who were the ones left with the greatest degree of lingering trauma, if the word trauma could even be applied. Trauma implied horrific damage. It would probably be more accurate to call it instead at most, lingering nervousness, and leave it at that. So everything returned shortly to normal. A miracle in and of itself. Oh, well, there were, of course, a few exceptions. There always are. Individuals with different stories, different views, who hadn't forgotten it all and who were still strongly affected, but they were vanishingly few. And of those who did still remember the chaos as it had really been, terrifying and raw, fewer still wished they did and withdrew into themselves. Maybe their loved ones would draw them out, maybe they wouldn't. Maybe they'd overcome it themselves, and maybe they wouldn't. There are many different stories out there, and everyone is different. And so it was, and so it went. Within a few short days of ecstatic celebration, restoration, and harmony, Equestria returned to normal and resumed its ever onward and upward trot towards a better future. Lieutenant Screech's eyes were heavy with dark bags, evidence of his lack of sleep, as he had to shake his head yet again to Crimson and Gloom. "No, I'm sorry, but there's still nothing. Every patrol knows to be on the lookout for him, but no ponies found hint nor scent of prey." Even as they were speaking, the three of them were swiftly moving through the night guard section of the palace, first down this corridor and then that, passing by opening and closing doors. Other night guards were rushing everywhere, making it seem like they possessed twice the numbers they really did. Everyone and everything in the palace was caught up in the same rush. Everything may have been reset, but Discord had still created so much work for the guard, both royal and knight alike, that they'd be trying to catch up for at least a month to come, at best. Some ponies got to have seen him. I don't get it. Everything else has come back, so Prey's got to be here somewhere, Gloom repeated for the 12th time. Gloom wasn't directing his frustration at Screech, but at the facts. It was frustration which had morphed quickly into rising desperation, and that had been 2 days ago. Now, it was more an exhausted sort of dread. The sergeant was just as tired as his lieutenant, but unlike the senior Thestral, he was the only officer who didn't have everyone under his command accounted for. It was increasingly looking like Prey might be the only missing person in the whole city. "I'm sorry, Sergeant. I have nothing more I can tell you," Screech sighed, truly feeling both Gloom's pain and the weight of his own responsibility. He was as a superior to Gloom and Prey both, after all, and Crimson too, of course. Duty before all else. Crimson finally spoke up. It was the same question he had asked last time, and the time before that, and the time before that. The same request, the same demand. The armored Pegasi's voice was tightly controlled. Gloom and Screech still heard the brutal strain he tried so hard to suppress in it.
Has Princess Luna been able to search for prey yet? Dreams, or his tracer bands? Sir.
Crimson's tensed wings were rigid at his sides. It was the same question, the same one he had asked 3 days ago. Screech had to give the same answer he had given 3 days ago as well. No, I'm sorry, Screech answered heavily. He didn't have to explain why. Not again. Not after Crimson had demanded an explanation the first time. Demanded! Him, Crimson, had demanded. Again, something Screech could well understand and empathize with. It is hard to hear that the one you care about, the one who is missing and might be lying helpless and hurt somewhere, could not come before the good of a nation. Intellectually you understood, but your heart? He would never accept that answer. But there was nothing new he could add to try and reassure them. No word of the lamb, no sign. Screech understood. He was a clan warrior. He knew what it was like to go out to greet a returning foraging party, not expecting anything to have gone wrong, and that moment of vertigo-inducing dread which seized your heart when you only counted 3 instead of 4 Thestrals flying back. The sudden anger which flashed into denial, and then a dreadful numbness as you helplessly watched the 3 shapes flying closer, unable to do anything but already knowing the truth, and yet still desperately peeling your eyes and searching for the 4th figure to appear. Screech well knew. It had happened to him. Duty can be such a heavy burden, and never does it weigh more heavily than when you least feel like upholding it. Screech stopped, taking the few seconds out of his hectic rushing back and forth. He briefly touched a wing to Crimson, then Gloom's shoulder plates. I'm sorry again, but there's nothing more that can be done right now. Then the lieutenant was striding off. It was the same again. Gloom and Crimson had waited, hoped, and worried, but it was the same. 2, now almost 3 days, and no hide nor hair of the lamb had been so much as glimpsed. They'd wanted to go out and search for prey themselves, no matter knowing that they'd have no more luck than the combined forces of the rest of the Night Guard. What had happened? Why? Was it because Prey wasn't a pony that he hadn't been restored? Where was he? How were they going to find him? Could they find him? Those are the questions the two of them asked themselves. They didn't ask the questions they tried to smother, even in the privacy of their own hearts. Was it already too late? Had it always been too late? The Night Guard was being run ragged, and it wasn't just their lack of numbers this time. The newest, although not so new Thestral recruits notwithstanding. The Royal Guard was also pulling double shifts and overtime, having to match their Batwing counterparts and working upwards of 12-hour shifts 6 days a week. For a moment, before the rush of duty reclaimed them, the two of them stood there, out of the way to the side of the corridor. Exhausted yellow-slit eyes met the dropping amber pair. Nothing was said. Nothing needed to be said. Nothing further could be said. Crimson's wings bunched tightly at his sides, the feathers dull. He hadn't cleaned them in days. There hadn't even been 1 minute of free time. The weight of one feather in particular was heavy. Gloom's hoof rose in the moment of distraction and tiredness, but encountered only the unyielding polished metal of his armor as he tried to scratch at his chest scar. Everyone else was fine. It was selfish that, when, after the miracle of harmony, and everyone else was fine, Scenic, Lily, Cart, and Saffron, all of them, but yet, the private moment of stolen time ended. Sergeant Gloom! Anybody seen Sergeant Gloom? Captain Nighthawk wants you! A harried Thestral called out, barely waiting to make sure he had been heard, and then was off again, this time calling out for Lieutenant Vivid Edge. Crimson had demanded an explanation from Screech. He had strongly asked one of Luna. Luna hadn't had time to see them. She was the princess, and Alicorn, co-ruler of the entire nation, with tens of thousands of ponies looking to her and her sister in this uncertain hour for guidance and instruction. Luna hadn't had time to see them, and yet, for them, the IS&D, in recognition of their service, she had still given them time. 3.5 minutes of her invaluable time that first night, when it was also most in demand. 1.5 minutes to listen to their hasty request, and to say, no! She could have left it there. She was an Alicorn, and it was her right. The 2 extra minutes was the additional time she chose to succinctly explain why she couldn't, and to apologize for their disappointment, but that they must hold out hope. Then she had teleported away to meet with her sister. Gloom and Crimson's request had been simple. Please locate prey through the tracer bands, or failing that, through the dream realm.
Nay, we cannot, for we hath not the time. It is all we are able to do to manage even half the nightmares infesting our dream realm and plaguing our subjects. 'Tis never so simple as finding but one dreamer among many, and at this time...
Luna had shaken her head, apologetic, even understanding, but as unyielding as iron.
At present there is no time. How long wouldst thou have us search? 1 hour, 2, and pass by the dreams of suffering sleepers who art before us and in need now? Nay!
Princess, the tracer bands, can you not?
Nay!
Luna had interrupted again.
We cannot! Once more, we have not the time. But even so, we are troubled. We suspect Discord's foul hoof. We cannot sense our magic near. We felt out for it, but it is gone. Or it is very far from here. Again, we have not the time to spend that we might confirm one way or the other.
Then she attempted to briefly comfort them.
Take comfort in this. We will search when the most immediate need has passed, and there is time again. We do not forget those who serve us. Until then, wait and hold out hope. Our knight will watch over prey. Now fare thee well, Sergeant Gloom.
The lieutenant had listened to Crimson and Gloom's plea. He had repeated their request to ask Luna the second and third nights to ask if she had had time to check yet. The answer was still no. A brand new stained glass window was installed in the main throne room of the palace. What was more, it was commissioned, installed, and finished on the second day. That such speed and importance was placed upon the construction of this one new stained glass window showed from how high up the order had come from. The court was packed and heaving at all hours of the day, and so all who bothered to look up had the chance to gaze upon the glorious depiction of the brave elements putting an end to Discord, the Lord of Chaos's madness by the powers of harmony. There is a limit to what one person can endure, or rather, what they think is the limit, only to discover that the world doesn't care for where you drew the line on what you're prepared to suffer. The world doesn't care. Stand in its way, fight back, give in, run away, it doesn't matter. It will run you over and grind you down to nothing without ever even noticing you in its path. Scenic Pate had decided he had had enough, and the world hadn't cared. He had quit the Night Guard because of what he had seen in Mayflower, the horrors he had survived, and the unnameable terror which had come in the night. No, he couldn't do it again. He just couldn't. Scenic had quit to live safe in Canterlot, to paint, to love Carton Juice, to find happiness. He wasn't brave, he knew that, but he couldn't do it again. No, he just couldn't. The world hadn't cared. Discord hadn't cared. It had come along and swept him away in the flood of chaos, like his life didn't matter. Like he was nothing, a nobody. Like he didn't matter. And he hadn't been able to butternut squash about any of that. There was a terrible, huge truth in that. A hard wake-up call. He's not coming back. Discord isn't coming back, Scenic stated out loud, stirring the pot. I know. Paint spot, honey. Princess Celestia will be ready for him if he does, and the elements of harmony will also put a stop to him too, Carton Juice answered. She had said much the same before. And same as before, Scenic wasn't certain she wasn't just trying to convince herself. Yeah, Princess Celestia will stop him for sure. Her and Princess Luna, too, Scenic agreed firmly, nodding at the pot of simmering potato soup as if it would agree with him. Carton Juice had been one of those touched by Discord. He hadn't seen it. They had been split up at the time. He hadn't even seen the creature Discord once during the madness. Perhaps the one small relief about the whole terrible affair. Carton Juice hadn't wanted to talk about it, knowing he was an utter hypocrite for it. He had still pressed her into telling him out of deep-seated concern. He knew how much Mayflower had bucked him up. The therapist had helped him realize that. So he'd been terrified of what it would do to sweet, loving, gentle Carton. But instead, she barely seemed to recall any of it. She had just said she wasn't sure, that it was like a waking dream. But there might have been something about trying to collect pollen from flowers, and trying to be a giant queen bee. Maybe running around going buzz, 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 and trying to sting every pony. Swallowing, Scenic had asked her if she had stung any pony, if she had been turned into a giant bee. Carton had blinked blankly, brow furrowed, and then given him a strange look. "No, of course not. A pony can't be a bee," she had said. Scenic had bitten his lip when he had gone to say how Discord had done that and more, and physically turning you into something else was fool's play to that monster. But he had stopped himself just in time, and smiled weakly in relief instead. How could she not remember? Scenic didn't understand, but he knew that it wasn't something you could just forget. Or was it? Maybe it was something she could try to forget. Was that right? Or was it wrong? Scenic didn't know. He just didn't know, and he was worried for Carton. Surely not being able to remember something was a bad sign, and yet so many other ponies didn't seem to clearly remember either, and none of them were worrying about it. Scenic himself had a hard time differentiating all of what had happened during that time of chaos. The floating buildings, the inside-out trees, screaming lampposts, false streets, and animated food to name just a few, with the sun and moon flying this way and that through the boiling purple sky and time distorting all around him. But Scenic couldn't shake the feeling that he still remembered more clearly than any pony else did, and he didn't know why that should be the case either. A very small cynical part of him, one which hadn't even existed until a mere hoofful of months ago, blamed his trip to the border of Equestria. If he hadn't gone out there and hadn't seen, then he wouldn't have the experience of these sorts of terrible things. And perhaps that experience was why Discord hadn't faded from his memory quite like it had for his beloved mare friend. But Carton Juice was okay now, physically at least, and she didn't seem concerned mentally either. That should be all that mattered. So long as she was okay, then he could suck it up and just learn to deal. For the first time, Scenic thought he was the same as Gloom, Crimson, and Prey, at least on this one thing. He hadn't gotten it before. Sure, he'd been a part of Mayflower, but also a part, and afterwards he had quit when they had stayed. But this, he now got. To put it in Scenic's own words, which he had spoken to himself after taking a good long hard look at himself in the mirror, "Okay, so I've seen some bucked up stuff, and now that stuff's in my head. I'm now bucked up too, but I can't tell any pony because Carton wouldn't understand, and most importantly, I don't want her to understand. And so what? So what? So what if she didn't remember like she should? So what if she didn't have to sleep with a nightlight on like he did? So what? He didn't want her to be like him, so he was going to make sure it didn't happen. Next time, and before, he hadn't even ever considered there even could be a next time. And hadn't that been another nasty wake-up call? Next time, what if Carton was the one who got hurt? That's what Scenic had learnt. That was the lesson he had taken away. That there could always be a next time. That it might not be him who was the one who got hurt, and that there wouldn't always be some pony else there to magically save Carton Juice for him. Scenic sightlessly stirred the soup pot, the now too hot stove making the thick potato soup bubble and spit. He barely even noticed when a scalding drop hit the scarred skin of his cheek and briefly burned him. The rest of his thoughts were too loud. Princess Celestia will save us. The elements and power of harmony will save us. Yeah. Randy tipped his heaped wheelbarrow of rich compost onto the freshly dug flower bed. Then he turned around and went back for another load. The much lightened wheelbarrow bounced along as he set out across the open grass stretch of the park, towards the collection of park gardeners' work huts. Absently, Randy hummed a tune he couldn't quite remember, but which was nevertheless stuck in his head. There was always plenty of work to be getting on with in the park. Budding flowers didn't care about no Lord of Chaos, no siree. All they wanted was some nice sunlight and warmth began pushing up. Vast patches of small but exceptionally pretty snowdrops and delicate crocuses thronged the flower beds, always the first to awaken every year just before the spring even arrived. They didn't mind the cold. Neither did Randy, not with his gardener's uniform, brisk work, and warm fluffy hat with earmuff flaps. Actually, the warm hat had been Lemon Pink's heartwarming gift to him, which made it doubly warm in Randy's opinion. A simple, practical gift for a simple, practical pony. Although, he had only seen her once since all the chaos had been put right. But that was fine, because she was okay. Not that there had been any doubt. Nothing could faze her. She probably could have coldly stared down Discord until he'd run away easily. But he'd been so worried at the time, and so relieved when he'd thrown open his front door and she'd been standing there. In relief, he had gone to hug her. She had frozen up and then shoved him away a mere second later with surprising strength. In surprise, he had looked up and found her pretty lilac eyes hard and cold. "Oh, what's wrong, Lemon? Did something happen? Are you okay? What happened?" he blurted. Lemon had given herself a shake. I am fine. Pardon me. I was not ready for that. Hello, Randy Pickaxe, by the way." Distractedly, she had brushed her silvery mane away from her face as she looked back at the street filled with celebrating ponies. He had tried to get her to come inside, to ask what she remembered and what she had seen. He himself had hidden in the attic while the chaos was happening, but she'd refused. He had asked her to please stay, but Lemon had insisted she had to go. There were urgent things she needed to check on. Randy had wanted her to stay. That she hadn't had hurt him more than he'd thought it would. But Lemon was an important pony, and she had important pony things to do. He was just grateful she had checked on him. That counted, right? Even if Randy suspected it was her mysterious boss who was always overworking her that she had gone to check on. And that he hadn't seen her since. And that he was missing her. And he really needed her opinion on something. No more moping. Things are good. Everything is fine. The sun is shining. The air is fine. Canterlot is back to normal, and everything is looking up. Hang on, that reminded him. Thinking about Lemon, wasn't the tune he was humming now from a snippet he had heard from her? Randy thought hard. What had it been? Lemon Pink really wasn't some pony he could picture humming, let alone singing, despite how much he would have liked to hear it. So, when did he pick up a tune from her? Now, how did it go? Randy tried to recall the words as he let go of the wheelbarrow and reached for the shovel, which was planted in the compost heap. Something. Oh, yeah. Raven, magpie, fly away. Scarecrow, keep at bay. Wheat and barley, dance and sway. Harvest king, come to play. Come to play. How did the rest of it go? It really is stuck in my head. I'll just have to ask Lemon how it all goes when I get to see her again. He really did hope that was sooner rather than later, though. Randy missed his friend. Not just because she was his mare friend, but because she was his friend, too. They didn't do any cult friend and mare friend stuff together anyways. Not really. Only going on dinner dates. But the time Randy was lucky enough to spend with Lemon, he found was somehow more real. Lemon Pink was exactly who she was. She knew it, and didn't need to try and prove it to any pony. She didn't need any pony else, which had first been unnerving to Randy, but now just was. She was an orphan, avoided because of her sharp horn, and you know what? She wasn't bitter or confrontational about it at all. It was sort of inspirational to Randy. Lemon was controlled and alert at all times, and Randy felt calmer and more contemplative when in her company than he did at any other time. And he missed that. He really looked forward to it coming around again. Randy didn't think about the future much, but when he did, he unconsciously thought about a future where Lemon Pink was in it. In what form, he wasn't sure, just that she was. Discord had been Discord, but that was in the past now. He didn't want to think about it. He didn't like to think about it, and he didn't need to. Discord had been a villain, trying to ruin all the good in every pony's lives. And he, simple Randy Pickaxe, had a lot of good in his life to get back to. If he let Discord taint his happiness of the future, then the nasty villain had won. And that's how he decided to look at it, at least. Randy nodded firmly to himself. Yep, that was that. Live in the moment and be happy. He pulled the shovel free and began, shoveling. Raven, magpie, fly away. Scarecrow, keep at bay. There, Saffron said quietly, deftly tugging the last line of Lily's new shirt straight. Lily grunted. Then she caught herself and made a better effort. Thanks. It's a big help. 'Cause clothes are your thing. It's part of my job, yes. I get paid to be an actor, Saffron agreed, smiling as she checked Lily over once again. Specifically, checked over her Meldwood deformities, that they were properly covered up by the new outfit she had insisted on. Lily nodded absently, nervously thinking about her coming meeting with Tallow, her brother. Wait, actor? But model? My job is to pretend to be some pony else. Some pony confident, happy, and bright. So yes, an actor. That's who the producers and photographers pay me to be. Some pony else. They don't even bother to try and see the real me, Saffron said shruggingly easily, beautiful golden curls bouncing. Lily searched for something to say, but this really was not the time. With her worry over the meetup with her unhelpful brother again, Discord's chaos and the fear it had induced in her heart, the smoldering anger at that fear, and compounding it all, the news Crimson and Gloom had brought, that Prey had vanished, maybe even literally vanished because Discord. William, that wasn't how we saw it at all. Are you saying it's all like, oh, don't worry about that. It's my job, but it's not my life. At least, not any longer. I have a life outside of work now, difficult as it is to find the spare time. Volunteering at the hospital, reading, baking, the odd pie, and visiting all of you. And Lily, in a moment of rare insight, was able to look beyond herself, something she was trying and failing to improve on. As she saw that despite not being able to see everything off in Saffron's perfectly made-up face, that there was still something wrong. She too was getting torn up inside over the missing lamb they both knew. Maybe not for quite the same reasons, but still. Saffron knew Prey as the lamb. Lily knew Prey as the member of the Night Guard. Because it's probably dangerous. Whatever could take Prey, it can only be dangerous, Lily thought. Crimson couldn't sleep. He was tired, both physically and mentally. Exhausted, really. They'd done so much, worked late into the day after an entire night, and there was still so much for them yet to do. Them. The two of them. Only two, not three. Crimson couldn't sleep. He had seen to all his needs, eaten, drank, removed his armor, and collapsed onto his bed. But he still couldn't sleep. So instead he sat on his bed and methodically sharpened his father's wing blades. Scrape. His fur and mane felt greasy. His feathers needed proper care, and so on. He'd get around to it. He would, just not right now. He was too tired. And he and Gloom needed to be back at the palace in only about 6 short hours. He really needed to get some sleep. But sleep just wouldn't come. Scrape went the whetstone. Someone had visited Prey's flat today. It hadn't been Prey. He had smelt them, their faint scent lingering in the air. A pony. A mare. Smelling ever so faintly of old blood. It had tickled a faint memory that Crimson couldn't place despite his best efforts. And they'd gotten inside of Prey's flat. And that was wrong. Strangers didn't get into Prey's flat. No way Prey would have allowed that. More than that, Crimson had subconsciously believed the feat just couldn't be done. For some reason. He hadn't realized his own assumption until he confronted it either. Because somehow, some way, Crimson was certain that Prey had something to keep out intruders. He didn't have an explanation, yet he was sure of it. But that mare had gone inside. Crimson was certain of it, although he had no evidence. They either had a key or had at least picked the lock. He carefully finished sharpening one side and turned the wing blade over. Scrape. Crimson didn't think they had picked the lock. Again, no evidence, but deep down he was certain that no one could pick Prey's lock. Or at least, not without consequences. Scrape. He had tried Prey's door earlier. He hadn't gone inside. That would have been wrong. Prey never entered his flat without permission, but after what he'd scented, he had to check. The door had opened for him without a whisper, both when he used his spare key and also without. Crimson didn't have a reason for why he had tried. He had turned the key back, relocking the door, and then simply pushed with his hoof, and it had opened. Magic was the simplest explanation. It probably was just magic, since Crimson wasn't any kind of expert, but he wasn't going to mention his discovery to anyone, not even Gloom. Perhaps the door would open of its own accord for Gloom if Thestral tried. Perhaps it wouldn't. It wasn't up to Crimson, though. It was up to Prey, because the door opening meant Prey's trust. Prey would be back. Crimson refused the traitor's idea that the door had opened to him because Prey wasn't coming back. Like it was now his. But that was ridiculous, because Prey would be back. Scrape. And when he came back, Crimson had some questions to ask his friend. Because that mare, whoever she was, had opened Prey's door and gone inside. Crimson wanted to know if the lamb had another friend. If Prey didn't want to answer, of course that was fine too. Crimson didn't need to know, he just wanted to know. But Prey had to come back first so he could ask.
Hurry up, Prey,
Crimson muttered tiredly in the dim gloom of his empty room. He couldn't sleep. Scrape. When weighed on the grand scale of the world, the effects of Discord's return and the subsequent defeat once again could be estimated through a much more definite and numerical scale. Because one thing that never changed when operating at the scale of governments and countries was money. Trade, economy, investments, money. Individual leaders, rulers, government officials, they may all react differently, have a different view on the events, and most importantly, have very different goals. But when all of that was set aside, you could always see the drive of gold behind it. You could tell a lot about a specific country, about their reaction and the real hidden reaction to any world event you cared to name by looking at whether gold flowed in or out after the event. Griffonia had all but blocked equestrian trade, hurting their own economy just as much as they hurt Equestria. That simple fact was so much more significant than most people could understand. Griffonia was willingly cutting off the history of trade, which had been mutually beneficial to the tune of not thousands, not even hundreds of thousands, but multiple millions of bits every year. Furthermore, Griffonia was split into two kingdoms, the Low Kingdom and the High Kingdom, yet they had come together in their denial of Equestria. It meant Griffonia was dead serious about their stance. The world stage was not limited to just Griffonia and Equestria, however. There were other nations out there, not as big, not as prosperous, but certainly not small nobodies. The Zebrican Lords, the Minotaur Kingdoms, the Diamond Dog Mines, small but nationally recognized nations of mixed species. There were plenty more out there. All combined, these lesser nations' total landmass might only just exceed Equestria or Griffonia, but they still had a voice. And once again, on the world stage, the volume of their voices could be accurately measured in money. And the big surprise? After Discord, and with the recent debacle of Nightmare Moon being real, having returned, and uncovered as Princess Celestia's sister, perhaps the biggest surprise was that Equestria was still making money. Oh, they had taken a hit across nearly every single market, but their national income was still greater than their expenditure. Equestria had, and still continued to operate on such a wide breadth of markets and levels, that all the censure, protests, and imposed tariffs against Equestria by all the nations put together simply weren't enough to halt the Pony Nation's prosperity. Because if any nation really truly wished to hurt Equestria, they'd first have to hurt their own economy even worse. Equestria was too big, too wealthy, and Celestia and Luna weren't bending to any demands, or even the politer entreaties. The discovered world wanted to know what had really happened to Discord. They wanted to know how he had been stopped, how they could duplicate the feat themselves, and most of all, they wanted reassurance that it wouldn't happen again. Because a nation is big, powerful, and slow-moving. But the individual, the leader in charge of the nation, they're afraid and very mortal. Whether from self-preservation or a genuine desire to defend his or her own people, every single leader, king, or lord wanted to be certain. And the two immortal sisters, the Alicorn rulers of the wealthiest nation on Equus, they weren't giving anything more than reassuring platitudes. "We have seen to Discord. He is no longer a threat. Fear not, all is well again. The sun and moon are ours again." Non-answers, possibly fake reassurance, a refusal of responsibility, but at the end of the day, the gold was still flowing into Equestria. So all the other nations, barring Griffonia, in the end had to reluctantly stifle their protests, bow their heads, and let it slide. Equestria had the border guard, but no standing army. Despite their vast swaths of land, Equestria was not a nation of military might. It was rather one of unequaled economical power. And the rest of the nations? Even if they formed a coalition for the first time in history, they wouldn't have the power to bring Equestria to heel. They didn't have the power, or rather, the gold. And it's gold that makes the world go round. The lands of the Fell House were wide and vast. Their reach even more so. On the seas, on the land, in the sky, the merchant fleet of Triton Fell was world-renowned. The physical holdings of their estates reached everywhere. They owned and maintained the largest skyship docks in Equestria, possibly the world, even though the skyship trade had never evolved to a global scale. Not that it mattered. The Fell House was one of ponies. And what was a full third of the pony race capable of? Flight. House Fell owned 1/4 of all property in Cloudsdale. The reach of their leg was long, the might of their hoof vast. They employed, sponsored, and funded experts in every field and walk of life. They owned, stocked, and fully supplied 2 of the most highly renowned mage towers there were for Celestia's sake. And what's more, that was more as a side project that House Fell had undertaken over the centuries. They weren't even bothered if the towers turned over a profit. It was all about the prestige and being at the bleeding edge of magical advancement. When you talked about the world stage and mentioned the global power that was Equestria, after the name Celestia, the very next one which came to everyone in the nosed lips was Fell, followed in third by Blood. The trade setback and all the chaos and global panic Discord had caused? It wouldn't show up as more than a blip on the Fell accounting ledgers when viewed on the timeline of a year. When you were the level of Triton Fell rich, anything material became equal in value to you, since you could have it all, barring the time required to acquire and transport whatever it was, of course. How wonderful it was to be that wealthy, to never even wonder what it was like to be without, because that circumstance would never happen. Subsequently, though, it could be said that the most expensive thing in the world to Triton Fell was time, for only the 2 sisters were without limit in that regard. That one, ultimate end-all. But Triton Fell had anything and everything else. As such, he only placed any further measure of value on a hoofful of things outside of his time. His Fell name, the pride of his house, and his pure blood family. So that a meeting had been granted by Triton Fell to another pony late at night inside a private mansion deep within Fell-owned land said a lot. If the meeting had been widely known, it would have been of great interest and excitement. None but the servants, all of whom were utterly loyal to House Fell, whose families had grown up in service to House Fell and who would die in service to House Fell, would know of the meeting. Them and the 2 ponies the clandestine meeting was between. The cause of the meeting, the other individual, the topic discussed, the obscene payment offered without even blinking, and the iron-bound self-confidence of Triton Fell when he gave his demand, it would not be known to the rest of the world at large. Canterlot had been restored. Equestria was whole and unbroken. Like the clock had been reset and the events had seemingly never happened. Seemingly. If you only look above, if you were a pony, if you had been cleansed of madness, if you put your now vindicated faith in the princesses, who, since they were back in charge, meant they must have done something important against Discord, and if you believed in harmony. Seemingly, all was right again under the sun. But there were places where the sun didn't reach. Under the earth, down in the caverns, and beneath the mountain. Down there existed a veritable maze of tunnels which had been slowly formed over millennia. The huge crystals which grew everywhere, blocking or deflecting all long-range magic and spells. None of this was new. Ponykind had known of the unmapped caves since the great city of Canterlot was first built. They knew the tunnels were there. There were even tours of 2 or 3 of the uppermost caverns. Canterlot knew of the magic-distorting properties of the crystals. It was a well-documented phenomenon. They also knew the depths were unmapped. Sometimes geologists would take a brief caving expedition down the few safer and well-known paths. Ponykind knew all of this already, and they thought nothing of it. The caves were just background, everyday life. They had forgotten. They didn't see. A way down into the caverns, but also a way up into Canterlot. Complacent. Safe. Relieved. Happy. Blind. They'd had centuries to map the depths, and yet they hadn't. A monumental undertaking to be sure, but with collaboration, it would have been possible. They could have posted a watch on the underground entrances where they joined the city, but there were no sentinels. Failing that, they could have at the very least simply filed in or blocked off the way, if they didn't want to have to bother with maintaining a guard. That hadn't been done either. An army could have marched right into the heart of the city from out of those caves. It would have been an army who weren't afraid of the dark, who had invested great time and effort in mapping out the tunnels with scouts over the months, who could get to the mountain's base without being seen, who could move in secrecy. A changeling army could do it. Not just an army, a swarm, a vast swarm, a war swarm. An army so large that they were literally on a starvation deadline. So many troops that they were burning through their supplies like wildfire. An army that had an operational time measured in weeks, maybe even only days. An army so large it would win by sheer weight of bodies. Losses wouldn't even matter, because every death was simply less mouths to feed at the end. An army large enough to cover the skies of Canterlot and fill every street all at once, to bury any guard under black carapace corpses if need be. An army without morals or self-preservation or intelligence. Just overwhelming surprise and sheer numbers. If such an army existed, and if it could traverse the maze of crystal tunnels, and if it could emerge undetected, then Canterlot would fall from within. If the attack came from without the city walls, it would never work. The army would be seen in time, either by eye or magic. The defenses would be raised, all guards summoned, magical enchantments activated, civilians evacuated and defended. Attack from without was all but doomed to fail. But it is vanishingly rare that any castle falls to assault. Almost always, as proven again and again throughout sordid history, they fall from within. The tunnels were the way in. The changelings had an army out there somewhere. Days away at most, perhaps only hours. And nobody but Prey knew it. And Prey was gone. And then, he wasn't gone. On the morning of the 4th day after the defeat of Discord, a little after 8:10 actually, a runt lamb with white wool walked right into the night guard section of the palace and politely asked the first exhausted and harried Thestral he came across where he might find the ISND. The little lamb smiled politely, thanked the rather nonplussed Thestral, who was that special sort of tired and overworked that they'd just reached the stage of just, "It is what it is, I'm not going to question it anymore," and trotted off down the indicated corridor. The tired Thestral noticed something was amiss. He had seen Prey before, but he was too tired to care, and he still had so much left to do before his shift was out. Oh, and he needed to go report the safe return of Prey immediately too. And he was happy about that, of course. But, seriously, right now it was just more work. The word spread quickly. Nighthawk and the lieutenants on duty knew within 4 minutes. Glim and Crimson dropped what they were doing and rushed out. They noticed what was wrong so much faster than that first tired night guard had. Sky blue eyes, white wool, and the absence of any other splash of color. Gloom's eyes first saw the lack of gold on Prey's forelegs. Crimson first saw the lack of Prey's ribbon. The lamb was smiling wryly, though, and beat them to speaking first.
"Hey, I made it back. Sorry for making you worry. Have I missed anything important?"
There was a lamb who couldn't forget, but who had wanted to be forgotten.